been the deputy mayor of Asbury for a decade, and a lot of people come to Asbury when they're campaigning, but once they're in office, you never see them again. So thank you so much, Senator. Asbury, who's been a part of this church since 2022, one of my favorite pastors in all of Asbury Parks, and one of the fastest growing denominations, church denominations. I'm not a church person, so bear with me when I say that. But he's doing a great job, and that's the point. He's doing fantastic. And let's also give all the guys because he is defending his doctorate tomorrow morning. So can we all say or the fact that the Senator came out to talk to us. So thanks, everybody.
And I know many of you are thinking when you walked in, you saw in the vestibule, there was a banner of a pastor on that banner. And as I stepped up, I know what you're thinking. He looks even more handsome in person. We are so honored to be able to host this event. I want to say good evening. On behalf of the 60 Ladies Zion Church, I welcome you to this town hall meeting. We are honored to host this space for the community. Across our state and nation, decisions are made, of course, that directly impact our families, our neighborhoods, and our future. Issues across the spectrum of things. They're not distant issues, these are local issues, personal issues. And during Black History Month, it is important to acknowledge that it was in spaces like this where enslaved Africans first imagined freedom. In spaces like this where strategies for the Underground Railroad were whispered and prayed over. Spaces like this where men and women organized boycotts, marches, and movements that will ultimately change this nation. That space is the Black church. Black church has always been more than just a religious institution. It has been a meeting place for justice, headquarters for hope, and launching pad for change. And that is why this town hall matters and why we are so honored to host this meeting. It reminds us that democracy is not something that happens far away in Washington. It happens right here. We are grateful to welcome tonight the leader who understands not only New Jersey,
Do you have an email
but
or
understands
something?
it's not just a place on the map, but it is a
I can get my
community
boss
of people
number.
whose voices deserve to be heard.
I need to verify. What's your name?
Iman, I-M-A-N, Shepherd, S-H-E-P-A-R-D.
I'm grateful that he is not here just to speak, but here to listen. So it is my esteemed honor to introduce and welcome Senator Andy Kelly.
Just anything so I can just confirm that you're the best.
You can ask me to counsel me, no vouch for me.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm part of this.
I just can't believe that's
The only thing I can show you is my boss's number.
Do you have an article or something?
That's amazing. So, like, if you, do you need us to run through some questions and mock defense? I remember that I went through mine, I guess it was 15, 16 years ago now. I was definitely a bit of a mess. So, I wish you the best, and let's all make sure we're leaving it in good hands here tonight, so you don't have to worry about it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Asbury Park. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you to all the local leaders. Thank you to all of you for coming out here. This is such a pleasure to do. It's so important to do. I truly believe that the town hall is an incredibly important American tradition. I think it's an incredibly important democratic tradition. At a time when we see our country getting more and more divided, when we see online discussions and other things, really getting in the way of us being able to just confront each other, talk to each other as people, to try to recognize the respect that is necessary our democracy. You know, at every single town hall, Chris, you said this is the 92nd one, is that right? And every single town hall, I say whether you voted for me or not, you're my boss. My job is to serve you and your family to the best of my ability. Oh, we can agree on everything? Absolutely not. You know, we're going to have differences of opinions, so that's why it's important for me to hear from you, because you are my boss. You are my bosses. And I need to hear from you. I need to hear your perspectives, what is on your mind. But it's also important for you to hear from me, hear what it is that I've been focusing on, my perspective on different issues, so that we can try to make decisions together as a community. You know, my job is not that I'm not the CEO, I'm not the president of this state. I am a representative, I'm a public servant. You know, and I really just want to continue to serve with that type of approach first and foremost. So I just want to say thank you for joining me here today. There are a lot of different issues that we are struggling through as a country right now. And I'll talk through some of them. We also have an incredible speaker, Kay Harris, who will join us in a couple of minutes to talk about the importance of observing and celebrating Black History Month. But I just want to start with some of the issues that I know are very much on our minds. A couple of weeks have passed since we saw the horrific shootings of Alice Prexy and Renee Good, but I know it still feels very recent, right? It still feels very fresh to a lot of us, because what we are seeing is a level of violence, a level of just challenge that we're facing as a country that's really just shaking us to our core in so many different ways. You know, I don't know if you saw and read the statements from their families, but just, you know, for this to happen, not only for that to happen, but to have people like Christy Nolan and Stephen Miller calling them domestic terrorists, trying to inflame the situation, pour gasoline on the fire. I mean, it's so wrong, it's so dangerous, and it just gets to so much of the challenges that we're facing right now. I was participating in a hearing in the Senate with the director of ICE, the director of the CDP, and you know, when I was going through this, it was just the other week. You know, it just again highlighted so much of the challenges that we're facing, and just the extremism in their tactics. You know, for instance, I was pointing out that when you get through you add together the police forces of Minneapolis, of St. Paul, of the state troopers of Minnesota, you know, those three big pillars of the state, it's about 1,700 police officers that they have. The sheer number of federal agents deployed through ICE and CBP were between 3,000 and 4,000 federal agents. So just like giving that perspective, like nearly twice the number of federal agents compared to local law enforcement. And that's why, you know, on the ground, it was very much, I mean, the word that I hear from people in Minnesota is it felt that they were an occupied state, that they were an occupied city in Minneapolis. And I wanted to hit that home to you because, you know, look, we're facing challenges right here in our own state, within our own communities, right? I mean, you know, we see the problems, whether it's Delaney Hall up in Newark, which I've been to a couple times, and just seeing just the inhumane treatment of these detention facilities, especially the fact that they're run by these for-profit companies that are just making billions of dollars off of that, you know, industrialization of human misery. You know, or you know, the fact that right now ICE is trying to purchase a warehouse out of the Bronx area, out west of Morristown, and the community there doesn't want it. Nobody in the state wants it, because we know that this is just going to further enable the type of actions that ICE has been taking all across this country and furthering that problem. But it's just what you see in Minnesota is really the culmination of that. When I asked guys tonight, because on that day that we had a hearing, they announced that they're going to remove the surge from Minnesota, something that they should never have done in the first place. But certainly should have de-escalated immediately upon just the rise of the challenges that they face. So I asked guys tonight, I said, so much of the damage that you have done to this state, to this country. Can you look in the eye, can you tell Congress that you will never use this surge tactic again? Because when I see you leaving Minnesota, the first thing that comes to mind is where next? Is it going to be New Jersey? Is it going to be some other state? So I said, can you look me in the eye and tell me that this is not a tactic that you're going to use again? And of course, you know what he said. He said, no, you can't do that. Because this is still in their blood. This is deep to the core. This is just about one or two leaders. This is a rot within the institution. Not just of ICE, but we see it with CBP, which was the entity that was responsible for the killing of Alex Brent. We see it across the Department of Homeland Security, whether that's Christine Nolan, who I think many of you will agree should not be in that job, should be fired, should have to be resigned. But it goes beyond that too, right? Because I'll be honest with you, as I've seen up close how this administration works, even if she's removed, even if the head of ICE is removed, this administration will just put right back in somebody else that will just continue to do their bidding. Because you know that so much of this goes right back up to people like Stephen Miller, who I think is right now the most dangerous person in this country. And it goes right up to Donald Trump, who he himself said, that they won't do this, that they're not going to back down even after killing without correcting so much of what we saw. So it's important to keep that in mind. Important that we are focusing on the different challenges that we're facing. And look, like I said, right here in New Jersey, we got to do our part. Look out for different communities. I mean, right here in this area, right, there was an incident at the Wawa up on Bridge Ave, up in Red Bank, where ICE was there and just profiling people in the parking lot, grabbed somebody that's still in detention now. We see it up in Jersey City where there are ICE agents there saying that they don't need a warrant, as if the Constitution was just optional for them, it's advisory to them apparently. These are the types of challenges that we'll continue to see. So look, I'm going to go out to Asbury, talk to the community there, do everything we can to continue to stop it. I know the news made it sound like it's a done deal. As far as I know, it's not. And we're going to continue to push to stop that. Other issues that we're going to continue to go out to these different detention facilities, shine a light on this revolving door. And again, it's not just that it's for profit. It's like the company that runs the Lady Hall, for instance, Geo Group. You want to know who used to work at Geo Group? Tom Holman. You think that's a coincidence, right? You think it's a coincidence that Geo Group gives millions of dollars to Donald Trump's inauguration and to other things like that, and then gets these big contracts right back to them? That's part of the problem here, is that it has become just this whole ecosystem of corruption that I think is just so deep to the bone of so many of the problems that manifest in just such inhumane ways. There was this one instance, again, I raised that hearing with the ICE director, where there was a father that was taken by ICE in custody and left their 60-year-old daughter wandering the streets, asking people if they had seen her dad. I mean, just like how heartbreaking is that? I got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. Even if I didn't have kids, I know that that's wrong. It's just fundamentally, morally wrong. And so, that's what I hate so much is that we have become, we are losing touch with that sense of humanity. We're becoming a nation addicted to anger. We're having this crisis of empathy as a country. Failing to be able to see just what makes their life go in people's eyes. I just urge you to continue to go out and engage in the community, to be able to see this in terms of the challenges that we're facing. And I hear from leaders across New Jersey, some of them are telling me that they and people in their communities are not carrying their passports around because they're worried about whether or not they're going to get stopped on the streets or something like that. We've been pushing to make sure that religious institutions and healthcare facilities and schools, that shouldn't be a place where ICE should be able to show up and grab people. We have to be thinking about just the core of our communities. And that's something that I promise you I will continue to fight for. I think that this is so important for us now more than ever to be able to think through how we move forward on this. And so much of this is actually taken away from the core issues that I hear from so many people about, which is still about affordability, still about the challenges that we face when it comes to housing, when it comes to healthcare costs, when it comes to, and I know Asbury, I know there's a lot of issues here about housing costs, a lot of issues about rental costs, a lot of issues about development and making sure we're developing the right way. The pastor and I, some others, had conversations about challenges of unemployment, especially in the Black community, and making sure that we are lifting up opportunities for everybody. That it isn't about who you know or how much money you donate to so and so. It's about fairness, something of just fundamental fairness when it comes down to it in terms of these opportunities. But does it look like we have fairness now? Like, with Donald Trump, I was there in the Republic when he was inaugurated, and in his speech, he talked about this is going to be a golden age for America. Well, look, 14 months in, or 13, I don't know, like 8 years in, does it feel like a golden age for America? You know what it is? It's a golden age for those billionaires that are on stage with him at the inauguration. It's a golden age for Mark Zuckerberg, for Jeff Bezos, it's a golden age for Elon Musk, and for TikTok, and all these others that were willing to kiss the ring. And that's what I just find so deeply broken, about this. Because as I was just telling you about these ICE raids and CDP and CERT, you want to know where that came from? It came from you, in terms of your money. And it was that reconciliation bill that literally did a wealth transfer from those that are on Medicaid, who are the most vulnerable in our communities, took that money and gave it to Homeland Security, gave it to Stephenville, gave it to those that. So I just wanted to connect the dots there. Because this is not only a president that isn't focused on affordability, he could care less about your affordability. He is a president that is literally making things harder for us on so many issues that are fundamentally important to us. And I just think that is important, because that kind of corruption, whether that's literally the billions of dollars, I often say, Trump's family has made billions of dollars since January 20th last year. How much has your family made in the last 13 months? Whether it's that kind of direct wealth transfer, or it's about just the implicit corruption of these contracts, Geo Group and Core Civic and others. That's something that I hope we are all able to focus in on. And we'll get back to some of that later. I've got a couple other issues I want to engage. But as we're going through this, I did want to just bring up Kay Harris. What's Kay? There. So, Kay, if you don't mind, why don't you welcome up Kay Harris here? And here's a reminder, because when we want to think about where we're going as a country, especially as we're observing and celebrating our 250th anniversary as a nation, I think it's important for us to be able to acknowledge all of our history. To acknowledge not just, when we don't want a situation where we're literally continuing to see this government pulling down panels in Philadelphia that are talking about slavery, right? I saw that in the news. Thankfully they just put the panels back up because of the judge. But one thing I just want to say before I hand it over to Kay, the government attorney that was arguing to justify them pulling those panels out, this is what he said. The government gets to choose the message it wants to convey. That is wrong. Just flat, disgustingly wrong. And I just wanted to share that with you, because that's what they say out loud. You can imagine what they think inside their thoughts there. But it shows you what we're up against. Just the selective history that's out there. Whereas for us, we need to understand the totality of it, the good and the bad, the things that we have to learn from. And that's why it's so important. That's why I asked Kate to be able to come up here and share a little bit of the history here in this area. Thanks.
I have the opportunity to actually hear from our other communities. So thank you for that. And also for Pastor Newton for opening up your home to us. And I'd like to say that it's just so fitting that we are actually holding this town hall meeting or discussion here at St. Stephen's Church. Because this is actually ground zero in the civil rights movement. I was asked to talk about a little bit about civil rights, but I can't start in the 1950s, 60s because they actually started decades earlier. And remember back to when Asbury Park was actually founded in 1971, you realize that was just 6 years after the end of the Civil War. So that was in the midst of Reconstruction. And of course, Reconstruction was the opportunity to establish rights for African Americans and get them involved in the feet on the ground, move forward, to abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment and also the 14th Amendment. And then what happens after Reconstruction is the backlash of Jim Crow laws. And in my mind, I think there could be a lot of parallels that we can learn from the past and present. What happened in 2008? Our first president, Barack Obama was our first African American president. We're so proud of it, but then there's another backlash. But to get into the historical aspect of Asbury Park, I really like to set the stage to those founding years, following Reconstruction or during that period of time. Keep in mind that it was founded 10 years after it was founded. We had over 800 hotels, cottages, and boarding houses in Asbury Park. Asbury Park attracted thousands of white visitors to come and visit the Asbury Park area. But we also saw an influx of blacks from the South seeking better employment, and some trying to escape KKK backlash as well. So with the development of all these commercial businesses and hotels, what does that mean? You need waiters, porters, dishwashers, cooks, and these were elaborate ballrooms. They had bowling alleys, so they also required musicians. And when they came, where did they reside? They tended to reside on the west side of Asbury Park. And I might remind you when James Brown founded Asbury Park in 1871, that was really just the territory from Ocean Avenue to Memorial Drive to where the railroad tracks are. So the West was still a part of Benton Township. And it wasn't just African Americans that lived there, it also brought an influx of Italians, Jews. A lot of the Italians are the ones that came and helped build the railroad, clean the dishes. We had Latinos and Germans, so it was a very diverse neighborhood on the west side. But as things moved on, there tended to be a backlash once again because you have all of these workers here and they wanted to enjoy the boardwalk beaches as well. So very quickly, there was again, James Brown started to introduce restrictions to access to these. And in terms of the beach itself, they came up with a good idea. There was a section on the boardwalk, and everybody keeps thinking about the part south of this casino. But actually, prior to that, they really were the main area. But he said, oh, I have a good idea. We'll restrict them to 5 to 7 a.m. That could be the time for the blacks, and that would keep everybody happy. But of course, it did not. So during that time, we had a series of what they call indignation meetings. And these were led by people such as Reverend Robinson, that I mentioned. And also Reverend Dickerson as well. And Reverend Dickinson is also from one of our churches. In fact, the church is where this is pastor who mentioned was really the forefront of civil rights activities. So there was a lot of activity there. And then eventually, because of the backlash, they did try to incrementally, okay, I know what we'll do. We'll put up placards where everybody was just the workers of the hotels. They were complaining that they were taking away all the prom spaces from the regular visitors. And what I like to do is kind of give you, so you can hear some of the voices from these prominent outspoken people at that time, such as Reverend Robinson. And they did hold indignation meeting in places such as Stephen A.M.E. Church. And he says, we own land, we raise the wheat, the corn, and we help save the union. We love our race and propose to vindicate our race when it is imposed upon us. But where the parlor is filled with guests, when did they refuse entrance to a colored man when they wanted a glass of water or cocktail? In the barbershops, the white people were willing to have our black hands on their faces, and yet they object to our presence on the beach. And in terms of Reverend Dickerson, the right thing to do is basically just to weed out all bad characters. Oftentimes they'll criticize the blacks saying, oh, they're down, this and that. And he says that sometimes they're right folks. I would want to be down, so why do you just know they have justice to the African Americans? And one's financial ability to board at a hotel and dress well is not a criteria of one's moral worth. And when they had this indignation meeting, it wasn't just your local, it reached as far as St. Mark's Church in New York City. And in fact, they even had busloads of folks to come to Asbury Park, and Reverend Robinson led what they call weightage, which was a precursor to the sit-ins that we experienced in the 1960s. And I just wanted to mention other names such as Reverend A.E. Jensen, and he happened to be the pastor, minister, or Reverend of St. Augustine's Church, which is my church right down the street. And then in terms of the progress made, they finally said, okay, we will relinquish, but instead they gave them part of the beach between First and Second Avenue. And that was the mainstay of things. And by the way, I think it's interesting that the coverage that was had was beyond Philadelphia, New York, and Maryland. I actually looked at newspapers in Indiana that was talking about all the other folks taking over Asbury Park. There was also an article in the Fort Worth Daily Gazette, if you'd like to read you. And they sort of refer to the hypocrisy of the North. Even in northern hotels and sleepers did refuse to take the medicine they insisted upon prescribing for their southern counterparts in the purifying waters of Long Branch, Asbury Park, etc. This compromise does not admit the races into the water during the same hours and marks the towels left by chance the right hand and they should be dried on the linen of a hand performed the same service by a black hand delayed a week before. And in later years, eventually, James Bradford did relate to some extent. He said, okay, they can have all the First Avenue Beach. And that was the playground of the Asbury Park area. And that effect, in some of the papers included by Thomas Fortune, actually, this was an upstanding place where folks from all over, like this was the playground for even African Americans. However, they started putting up signages, okay, you're on the beach, signs put up, all blacks, not just the waiters and the workers, no blacks were allowed in the pavilions and restaurants. And this was due to the pressure from the different hotel owners presented that. And then Asbury Park was annexed to, not Asbury, the west side was annexed as part of Asbury Park in 1903. So we also had the power of voting. And because there was a period of time in 1912, there was a natatorium that was being built on the boardwalk right at 2nd Avenue. So even though for years they were satisfied that the blacks had this area anytime they want, once the natatorium went up, oh boy, we're the site of too many white folks. So once again, we have to move them. In fact, in the dead night, they took all of the little houses they used for dressing rooms. They moved them out to 8th Avenue, the fishing pool, fishing area is. And of course, again, there was another backlash. So you do have people such as Atkins and also Dr. Parks, who's another prominent person who's active in that area. And okay, they had to have their place. So they were able to maintain their little playground for another 5 to 6 years. And then eventually, in 1915, or about 1911, excuse me, they actually they were successful in moving them south of the convention hall, of the casino area. That's the area between Ocean Grove and Asbury Park. In fact, they gave their signs and said no swimming allowed for the natives to do so. So it seems as though the fight continued even longer after that. Then I'd like to take you into like the next century because the voices actually changed over time. Once you get into the 1920s, there was like the KKK, for example. An interesting thing about the KKK, we know it was in the South, and there were eventually some protests, but I noticed that it was a journal in 1923, the Savoy magazine, that had plenty of articles or advertisements. So the KKK did creep up in this area, and it was like a mainstream organization. And then the other work on voices such as Walter Upperman, who was a prominent attorney, F. Leon Harris. I might mention my grandfather, who was a community activist, and he was also, he and my grandmother were founders of the Asbury Park NAACP, and Dr. Parks was actually the president of the NAACP at that time. So as I mentioned, in the NAACP, I would say after going to this next century, there were other voices such as Irving Jones in the 1970s, Howard West in 1980s onward, along with Maxine and Thomas Daniels, who were prominent. He's actually an engineer of this area, and he was also a human rights activist. And then eventually Adrian Sanders. I'm just trying to go through a timeline just to give you a sense of how the fight continues. Sometimes it's in a more slow manner. It's the bias and segregation that creeps into the schools and into the workplace. So if you go back to the 1940s, as I mentioned, the West Side was a very diverse neighborhood. Banks Avenue was actually two different buildings, Banks Avenue North and South. The whites were in the north, and then this African Americans were in the south side. And then in 1946, there was a fight, and we also had Highland Ward, who was an African American principal. They fought, was I running out of time? Okay. Just mention one other thing. I won't mention, there's plenty of other people I don't want to overlook, I just wanted to acknowledge Alan Roberts here today, who early this evening received Senator, and I wanted to thank you very much for that. And the fact that her father opened up a business on Springwood Avenue in 1940, but it continued years after that, 60 years even after the uprising or right at Springwood Avenue. So she was very wealthy. She survived another 56 years. And after that happened recently, the commercializing Asbury Park, I have learned that she's not just the longest African American business operating on Springwood Avenue. Dow's business is one of just a few businesses in continuous operation, not just in Springwood Avenue, but the entire city of Asbury Park.
Thanks for giving us that rundown and really appreciate the chance to be able to just take a step back, because I know it gets so easy for us to just get caught up in the day-to-days. But now more than ever, it's important for us to have that broader context. So I just want to run through just a few more issues and then we'll open it up, because I want to make sure we have enough time for a good number of questions. I get asked a lot about this next issue, which is about the gateway tunnel. This is something that's unfortunately made national news because Donald Trump said he's going to terminate the project and cut off all the funding to it. That's illegal. That's against all the contracts, it's against what we have done in Congress, and that's something that we need to make sure we're standing up for, not just because it's important to New Jersey, which it is. I mean, this is important for our commuters, this is important for our economy, this is important for, I had this bipartisan group of mayors that I've been talking to out of the Raritan Valley that are talking about the importance for their communities, it's important for here, but it's also important for our country. You know, this is a project that's going to bring hundreds of millions of dollars in economic growth. It's arguably the most important concurrent construction project we have in the nation right now. So it's not just about our state or our region, it's of national importance. And which makes it all the more just infuriating when Trump, just because of political retribution, which is why this happened, says it's just cut enough money. Because this is like one of the, there are a lot of crazy things happening, so it's hard to make generalizations, but this is one of the clear, just shoot ourselves in the foot type of situations that I've seen. There really is nothing good that comes out of it. We have 1,000 construction jobs that were put on hold. You know, construction workers that I talked to, they talked about how they thought they were going to have a decade of steady work. Now they're not certain. A lot of them, some of them moved up to the area to be able to do this type of work. And the idea that that the president might change his mind if he put his name on a station, I mean, like, geez, have we gotten to that point where like extortion is just so out in the open and rampant? Yes. Unfortunately, yes. And I'm glad that the judge has so far pushed back on this, and I'm glad that we have a government that stood up as well. So thank you, Michael Sheriff. Thank you to others that are standing up and fighting this. Because we were able to get over $200 million restored, but do I feel certain that this is going to continue? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So we got to keep at it through these legal challenges that are out there, but just continuing to raise the issue. I had a telephone town hall for both the mayor that said this is not a partisan issue. We have to continue to press that. You know, this is not something that we need to see, but unfortunately, we're seeing that not just domestically, but internationally as well. We have an extortion foreign policy happening in this country. I was just in Munich last weekend at a Munich Security Conference. Where we saw just left and right, unfortunately, allies from around Europe and around the world just telling me in meeting after meeting that they're just moving forward. They cannot wait for our country to get our act together. And you know what happened a couple weeks ago when Trump was literally threatening military action to take Greenland? That was just a break. And what was really sad, and I say this as someone who worked in diplomacy, I've worked in foreign policy before, is that it just became very clear something that I already felt that I know you feel too, which is some of this damage that's being done right now is irreversible. It is irreversible, the damage. It's not going to be like, once Trump is out of office, we have another president, we're not going to have we're back home again. The rest of the world just doesn't trust, not just Donald Trump, they don't trust our system of government right now. They don't trust the special interests, the billions of dollars of super PAC money that is, taking our democracy hostage. I think when the history books were written, that Citizens United decision will be seen as one of the most damaging, destructive things in history. And it's tough. It's tough. I say that as someone who lived and worked on a naval military base in Afghanistan, 16 years ago. I saw our naval battle, I saw our defense after September 11th. And now I see them literally asking, what are they asking? If something were to happen to our country, if an attack happened to our country right now, can you say for certain that your country, that America, would respond? That's what's at stake here. They are, whereas we, the way I was sort of kind of say is like, we are no longer seen as the indispensable nation, we are seen as the unreliable nation. And it's only honestly it goes beyond that now. Some of the countries that I talk to, they would say that when they're talking in their own national security way, that they now talk about our nation as a threat. They talk about our nation as a national security threat that they now need to hedge against. And so I just wanted to share that with you because I was just there a couple days ago, and it's still very fresh from across the board. And we see that right now, things aren't slowing down on the international level. You're seeing some of the news today. Donald Trump has positioned military assets all throughout the Middle East. We have now 2 aircraft carrier groups out there, 10 naval destroyer ships out there, as he is now directly, potentially in the next few days, taking sustained and significant military action against Iran. Now look, I don't think anybody here is going to defend Iran. You know the dangers that they pose. But we also know the dangers that this poses. As someone who worked in Iraq, worked in Afghanistan, I worry so much about what our country has been through, especially when we have so many other challenges. So I say that, look, to this crowd right now, how many raise your hand if you want to see our country go to war with Iran next? Raise your hand if you think that if a president is going to take military action, that they need to hear from the voice of the American people and be able to bring this before Congress, right? And this is just what I find so crazy about this situation is, we saw that military action in Venezuela, the boat strikes, the raid in Europe. We have not had a single public hearing in Congress, in the House or the Senate, dedicated to Venezuela, dedicated to the challenges that we're facing and this type of challenge that we're going through right now. I just wanted to share that with you because it is so unnerving to see our government taking these steps that are putting our service members in harm's way. Do we have the best military in the world? Of course, and we are incredibly proud of how trained they are, but they are there for our defense. They are not there to be a personal militia to this president that he can just use whenever he wants. And this is where I get trained down to Union Station in DC and just see all the National Guard there. The idea that this president is trying to normalize us having military troops in our cities and in our